2 women knocked on my door in the middle of a tropical storm. They were soaked, shaking, and out of options. 14 other houses on the street had already turned them away. I almost did too, but I didn't. And 3 weeks later, their father stood in my workshop in a suit worth more than my truck, ready to take them home. He'd already decided I was nothing. Then something fell out of my pocket, hit the concrete floor, and the look on his face changed completely. But let me start from the beginning. Hey, my name's Garrett Nolan. I'm 28 years old and I live in a small concrete block house on a dead-end street about 15 minutes east of Fort Myers, Florida. It's the kind of neighborhood where the lawns are more sand than grass. The mailboxes lean at odd angles. And the only thing that moves after dark is the occasional possum crossing under the Trillic. The house belonged to my grandparents, Frank and Della Nolan. They raised me here after my mother left when I was 7. I say left because that's the cleanest word for it. One morning, she was there, pouring cereal, humming something off-key. By dinner, she was gone. No note, no call, no forwarding address. Just an empty closet and a silence that filled every room like smoke. I never knew my father. Never had a name, a photo, a story, just a blank space where an answer should have been. But Frank and Della, they filled the rest. Frank was a mechanic, not the kind who works at a chain shop and follows a manual. The kind who could listen to an engine idle and tell you which valve was a quarter turn off. He built the workshop out back with his own hands in 1974 and spent the next 40 years restoring classic cars for collectors up and down the Gulf Coast. Porsches, Jaguars, Corvettes, the kind of machines most people only see behind velvet ropes at car shows. Frank brought them back to life with patience and grease and a stubbornness that all bordered on devotion. Della kept everything else together. The house, the books, the meals, the quiet way she'd put her hand on your shoulder when she knew you were hurting but didn't want to say it. She had a phrase she repeated so often, it was practically stitched into the walls. You build what you keep. You keep what you care for. She said it about the house, about the workshop, about relationships, about everything. Frank's heart gave out when I was 22. A Tuesday afternoon. He was sanding a fender on a 71 Corvette Stingray, and he just didn't get up. Della held on for 2 more years after that, but the house was too quiet without him. When she went, it got quieter still. I kept the workshop. Took over the business. Restoration of classic luxury vehicles. Same clients, same coast, same tools. Naples collectors send me their Ferraris when the paint needs love. Marco Island retirees bring in their Jaguars when the chrome starts to pit. I'm good at what I do. Meticulous. Patient. I can spend 3 weeks on a single fender and make it look like it just rolled off a factory floor in Stuttgart, but the work has been drying up. A bigger shop opened in Cape Coral last year. Flashy website, modern lifts, a waiting room with espresso machines and magazines nobody reads. They've been pulling clients I've had for years. I'm 3 months behind on the electric bill, too, on water. The insurance on the shop is due next month, and I don't have it. The only thing keeping me afloat is a 1963 Jaguar E-Type. I need to finish by next week for a collector in Naples. If that check comes through, I buy another month. If it doesn't, the math stops working entirely. I drive a 94 Chevy pickup with a cracked windshield and no air conditioning. In Florida, in September, every morning I climb into that truck, drive past the gated communities of Estero and Bonita Springs, where my clients live behind walls I couldn't afford to paint, and come home to a house where the porch light flickers when the humidity gets too high. I touch luxury every single day with my hands. I just don't live in it. If you're the kind of person who believes that the people the world overlooks are the ones who matter most, you're in the right place. Subscribe and stay with us. What happened next in this story is something I still think about every day. Nights, I don't do much. No bars, no friends, really. The guys I knew growing up moved away or moved on. I had a girlfriend once, lasted about 8 months. She said I was emotionally unavailable, which is a polite way of saying I don't let people in. She wasn't wrong. When your mother walks out before you're old enough to understand why, you learn something about doors. You learn they open both ways, and the people who walk through them don't always come back. I keep one thing in the chest pocket of my work coveralls at all times. An old Phillips head screwdriver with a wooden handle darkened from decades of use. The initials FN are carved into the grip with a pocket knife. It was the first tool Frank ever bought when he opened the shop in '74. He never used it for real work anymore. It was too worn, too heavy for precision jobs. But he carried it every day like a good luck charm. This one started everything, he used to say, tapping the handle against the workbench. You don't throw away what started you. I don't use it either, but I carry it every day. Some people wear crosses. Some carry photos in their wallets. I carry a screwdriver with my dead grandfather's initials on it. If that sounds strange, you probably grew up with more people to hold on to. That night started like most September nights in Southwest Florida. Thick air, the kind that sits on your skin like a second shirt. The forecast had been warning about a tropical storm pushing up from the Gulf all week. But in Florida, you hear that so often you stop flinching. I was in the workshop past 11, hand polishing the chrome trim on the Jaguar's hood, the radio playing some old country station whose name I couldn't tell you if my life depended on it. The car was almost done. 3 more days and I could deliver it, invoice it, and keep the lights on for 1 more month. That's when the sky opened up. Not a drizzle, not a gradual build. An immediate wall of water hitting the metal roof so hard it sounded like someone had dumped a truckload of gravel from the sky. Wind slammed into the shop doors. The lights flickered twice, then held. Thunder cracked close enough to vibrate the concrete under my feet. I shut everything down, pulled the tarp over the Jag, killed the lights, and ran the 30 feet to the house through rain that soaked me to the bone before I reached the porch inside. I dried off, put the kettle on, and sat at the kitchen table. Bills spread out like a losing hand of poker. Electric, overdue. Water, final notice. Insurance, circled in red. I stared at the numbers the way you stare at a lock when you've lost the key. The math never changed. It just got quieter each time, like a countdown you've stopped fighting. The knock came at 11:47. I know because I looked at the microwave clock. Thinking I'd misheard it over the storm, nobody knocks on my door. Certainly not at that hour. Certainly not in weather like this. It came again. Harder, urgent. I got up, walked to the front door, and pressed my eye to the peephole. Through the distortion and the rain, I could make out 2 figures on the porch. Women, young, huddled together, arms wrapped around themselves, hair flattened against their faces, water pooling around their shoes. Every instinct I had said, don't open it. This neighborhood has stories. People use weather as cover. You keep the chain on, and you say sorry through the crack. But then lightning flashed, and for 1 full second, the porch lit up white. I saw their faces. Not dangerous, not scheming, just afraid. I've been afraid like that. Standing somewhere with nobody coming. I know what that face looks like because I wore it for most of my childhood. I unlocked the deadbolt, pulled the door open halfway. The rain roared in. Can I help you? The taller one stepped forward. She had to almost shout over the wind. I'm so sorry. Our car stalled out about a mile back on Daniels. We have no cell signal, and nobody else would open their door. We just need to use a phone or wait out the storm, please. Her voice was steady but fraying at the edges. The shorter one beside her nodded hard, teeth chattering. Please. We've been walking for almost an hour. I scanned the street behind them, empty, just black water rushing along the curb, and the neighbor's recycling bin tumbling down the sidewalk in the wind. No car, no one following. I opened the door all the way. Come in. They stepped inside and the house changed. Not the walls, not the furniture. Something in the air, like a room that had been holding its breath for 6 years. Suddenly remembering how to let it go, the taller one pressed the towel I'd handed her against her face. I'm Nora Calloway, and this is my sister Jess. The last name meant nothing to me that night. It would later, and when it did, it would explain why a man in a linen suit showed up at my door 3 weeks later looking at me like I was a problem to be solved. Jess was the younger one, 24 with dark curly hair and an energy that filled a room even when she was soaking wet and shivering. She smiled through the cold, the kind of person who makes misery look temporary by refusing to give it any respect. I'm so sorry about your floor, she said, looking down at the puddles forming around her shoes. I feel like we just brought the entire Gulf of Mexico into your living room. The floors survived worse, I said. Trust me. Nora was different. 27 maybe, blonde hair darkened by the rain, sharp features, a posture that stayed composed even while dripping wet on a stranger's doormat. She didn't fill silence the way her sister did. She occupied it. Her eyes moved across the room quietly, not nervously, but the way someone reads a space when they're used to evaluating structures. She noticed things. The framed photo of Frank and Della on the wall, the shelf of old car manuals organized by decade, the single coffee mug with the chipped rim sitting alone by the sink. I tried the landline, static. Tried my cell, no signal. The storm had taken everything down. Phones are out, I said. Both of them. This storm's not letting up anytime soon. You're welcome to wait it out here. I've got a couch that folds out. It's not the Ritz, but it's dry. It's not the Ritz was generous. The couch had a spring that poked through the left cushion if you sat in the wrong spot. And the sheets I found in the linen closet had been washed so many times they'd faded to a color that no longer had a name. But they took them without hesitation. I made hot chocolate. Found 2 packets in the back of the pantry. It's a kind that comes in paper envelopes and dissolves into something that's more sugar than cocoa. Della used to keep a stock of them for hurricane season. Storm chocolate, she called it. I hadn't touched them since she was gone. We sat at the kitchen table, the 3 of us, the rain hammering the roof above. Jess talked easily about the road trip they were on, coming up from Miami, about the car stalling in a flooded stretch near Daniels Parkway, about how they'd walked through the rain looking for help. How many houses did you try before mine? I asked. Jess looked at Nora. Nora looked at her mug. 14, Nora said quietly. 14 doors. Nobody opened. The number sat in the room like something heavy placed on the table between us. 14 families. Heard 2 women knocking in a storm and decided it wasn't their concern. I almost did the same thing. The only difference between me and those 14 closed doors was about 3 seconds of hesitation and a flash of lightning that lit up 2 frightened faces at exactly the right moment. That thought kept me awake long after they fell. Asleep on the fold-out couch, the conversation went deeper than I expected for 3 strangers. Sharing bad cocoa at midnight during a storm. Jess asked about the workshop. I told them about Frank, about the cars, about how I'd inherited the business and was doing my best to keep it running. I kept it light. Didn't mention the bills stacked in the kitchen drawer. Didn't mention that doing my best was a generous way to describe what was actually a slow slide toward losing everything. Nora asked fewer questions, but listened harder than anyone I'd met in years. At one point, Jess went down the hall to use the bathroom, and the kitchen got quiet in a way that should have been awkward but wasn't. "Can I see the workshop?" Nora asked. "Now, it's pouring outside. I don't mind getting wet. I'm already soaked anyway." I wasn't sure why I said yes. We ran the 30 feet through the rain, both of us laughing at the absurdity of it, and I unlocked the shop door. Flipped on the overhead fluorescence. The Jaguar sat under its tarp, and I pulled the cover back. Nora didn't say anything for almost 10 seconds. She walked around the car slowly, her hand hovering just above the body line without quite touching it. Then she reached the front fender, the one I'd spent 3 weeks shaping by hand, and her fingers grazed the metal lightly. Not casually. The way someone touches something they understand is more than what it looks like. "You did this?" she asked. "Over the last 2 months, by hand mostly." "It's beautiful," 2 words. But the way she said them made the shop feel different. Like someone had finally walked in and seen what I saw every day. Not a failing business and a rusty garage behind a crumbling house, but something worth caring about. There's a specific kind of loneliness that comes from doing careful, beautiful work that nobody notices. That night, standing in the shop with the rain hammering the roof and a stranger running her fingers along a fender I'd shaped with my own hands, that loneliness lifted for about 30 seconds. And 30 seconds was enough to remind me what it felt like. By 2 in the morning, they were both asleep on the fold-out couch, Jess curled up under a blanket that had seen better decades. Nora tucked against the armrest with her jacket balled under her head. I lay in my room, listening to the storm thin out, and for the first time in years, I thought about something I usually avoided. The house didn't feel empty. That was a dangerous thought. I'd learned the lesson early, and I'd learned it hard. People leave. Warmth is borrowed. You don't lean into a wall that might move, but as I drifted off, the sound of other people breathing in the next room turned the silence from a sentence into something closer to a pause. And a pause, unlike a sentence, implies that something comes next. The morning came bright and scrubbed clean. It's the way Florida mornings always do after a bad storm. The sky so blue it looked staged. Puddles catching the light everywhere. Palm fronds scattered across the yard like decorations from a party nobody planned. I made breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, coffee. The bread was the discount store brand. It's a kind that tastes like it's apologizing for existing, but nobody said a word about it. Jess ate like she'd been training for the event. Nora ate slowly, her eyes drifting to the window, then to the workshop across the yard, then back to me. We talked the way people do the morning after something unexpected, lighter, staying near the surface, but with threads hanging underneath that neither of us pulled on. After we ate, I drove them to their car in my pickup. The truck coughed twice before starting, and I caught Nora glancing at the cracked windshield. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Their vehicle sat on the shoulder of a flooded side road, a Mercedes GLE, black, still managing to gleam under the mud. It looked like a spaceship that had made an emergency landing in the wrong zip code. I popped the hood. Water pump had seized from the flooding. Common problem after storms like this. "You'll need a tow," I said. "I know a guy." I called Miguel at the garage on Cleveland Avenue. He sent a flatbed over within the hour. While we waited, the September sun pressed down heavy, steam rising off the pavement in waves. Jess filled the time talking about their trip, about Miami, about how she wanted to do a road trip like this every year. Nora stood apart, arms folded, looking down the road the way people look. When they're thinking about something they're not saying. When the flatbed arrived and they climbed into the cab, Nora turned back one last time. "Thank you for opening the door, Garrett." It wasn't what she said. It was the way she said it. Like she wasn't only talking about the door to my house. I watched the truck disappear around the corner, the Mercedes trailing behind it on the bed. Then I drove home, parked in the driveway, and went inside. The fold-out couch was still open, sheets still wrinkled. A faint trace of something, shampoo maybe, or just the memory of someone being there still hanging in the living room air. I folded the couch back, washed the 3 mugs, walked out to the workshop, and stood in front of the Jaguar. Everything around me was exactly the same as it had been 24 hours ago. The bills were still in the drawer. The insurance was still circled in red. The shop was still one canceled contract away from closing. But the house felt different, and that difference, the absence of two people I'd known for less than 12 hours, weighed more than the silence I'd carried for 6 years. That was the quietest Saturday morning I'd had in a long time. It was also the last quiet one I'd have for a while. A week went by. Nothing happened. I delivered the Jaguar, collected the check, and paid the electric bill. The water bill went into the next month pile. The insurance stayed circled in red. It's taunting me every time I open the drawer. I took on a small brake restoration job on a '66 Mustang that would cover groceries for 2 weeks if I stretched. Honest work, steady hands. The kind of thing that keeps your mind busy enough to forget you're alone. I didn't think about them. That's what I told myself. But I noticed myself glancing at the front door more often than usual. And on Thursday night, I took the 2 mugs they'd used and placed them on the shelf above the sink instead of back in the drawer with the rest. I don't know why. I just didn't want them mixed in with the others. Then Friday evening, a knock at the front door. I opened it. Jess was standing there grinning wide, holding a pink pastry box from a bakery in Naples I couldn't afford to walk into. Behind her, Nora, carrying 2 iced coffees and wearing an expression that was trying very hard to look casual and not quite succeeding. We were in the area, Jess said. Naples is 40 minutes from here. I said, "That's basically the area," she replied without blinking. I let them in, and just like that, it became a thing. Weekends. Sometimes both of them. Sometimes just one. Jess brought food and chaos and 1,000 questions about the cars. She'd try to help in the workshop and end up with grease on her nose and a grin that made the whole shop feel 10 years younger. Nora brought coffee and quiet. She'd sit on the old wooden bench against the wall and watch me work. Sometimes she'd ask a question. It was always the right one. Never, "What are you doing?" Always, "Why that part first?" Never, "How long does this take?" Always, "How do you know when it's finished?" I didn't have a good answer for that last one. You just know. Something clicks. The metal feels right under your hand. The light catches the paint, and there's nothing left to fix. That's exactly how painting works, Jess said once, overhearing us. "You paint?" I asked, double quotes. "No, I just assume that's how everything good works." The connection with Nora grew in the spaces between words, not through big conversations, but through what I can only call parallel presence. Her sitting on the porch reading a book while I worked in the shop, the door opened between us. Her handing me a rag before I reached for one, me pouring her coffee without asking how she took it, because I already knew. Black, no sugar, slightly cooled. I started buying better coffee, not the instant stuff. Real beans from a roaster in town. I told myself it was for me. I knew it wasn't. I caught myself doing something one evening that stopped me cold. I was cleaning up after they'd left. I noticed I'd set out 3 mugs for the next morning. 3, like I expected them to still be there. I stared at those mugs for a long time, because the last time I'd put out more than 1 mug on that counter, Della was still alive. One afternoon, Jess was in the kitchen, attempting something she called Florida nachos, which was regular nachos with sliced mango on top, a crime against both Mexican and tropical cuisine. Nora was in the workshop with me. I was underneath a '69 Camaro, adjusting the exhaust mount when she spoke. "Garrett, yeah, why do you live here alone?" I slid out from under the car, wrench still in my hand. She was sitting on the bench, knees pulled up, looking at me with those eyes that never asked a question they didn't actually want the answer to. "Because people leave," I said, "and it's easier to get used to quiet than to get used to losing someone." She didn't flinch, didn't offer advice, didn't tell me that wasn't healthy. She just nodded, like she'd done the same math and arrived at the same answer. "My mother walked out when I was 7, I said. I hadn't planned to say it. The words just came, the way things do when someone's been sitting in your silence long enough that it starts to trust them. No reason, no goodbye. Came home from school, and she was just gone. My grandparents raised me after that. This was their house. That was their shop. They're both gone now, too." Nora was quiet for a long moment. "So you keep the shop because it's the last thing you have?" It wasn't a question. It was the most accurate thing anyone had ever said about my life. Have you ever had someone see the thing about you that you've never been able to say out loud? If you have, drop the word door in the comments. Just that one word. I'd love to know how many of us have been standing on one side, waiting for someone to walk through. The weeks blurred together in a way that felt unfamiliar. Nora started staying longer. Not just weekends anymore. A Wednesday here, a Thursday evening there. She'd set up her laptop on the kitchen table. "Freelance engineering consulting," she explained, "and work while I was in the shop. We'd eat together. Simple things. Grilled chicken, rice, whatever was on sale at the Publix on Colonial." She'd never complained. Never compared my kitchen to anything, but I started noticing details that didn't quite fit. The quality of her jacket, not flashy, but real leather. The stitching tight, and even the watch on her wrist, small, elegant. Definitely not something you pick up at a department store. The way she talked about her family, in fragments that never quite connected into a full picture. One evening, Jess was telling a story about a trip they'd taken to Europe, and she mentioned Dad's villa in Positano before catching herself mid-sentence. She glanced at Nora. Nora looked at her plate. Nobody said anything. I didn't push. Everyone has rooms they keep locked. I had a whole house full of them. But the fragments were forming a picture I hadn't asked to see, and it looked very different from two girls on a road trip whose car broke down in the rain. Then one night, the picture came into focus. We were in the workshop, late, past midnight. Jess had gone to bed hours ago. I was polishing a set of wire wheels for the Camaro, the radio playing low, when Nora set down her coffee mug and started talking. Not in her usual measured, careful way, in a voice that sounded like something cracking open from the inside. Her father was Douglas Calloway. Calloway Development. Luxury real estate along the entire southwest coast of Florida. Hotels in Naples. Condominiums on Marco Island. Mixed-use developments from Sarasota to Key West. A portfolio worth hundreds of millions. She said the name like it was something lodged in her throat that she'd been trying to swallow for years. She was a trained civil engineer, graduated top of her class, but her father had never let her actually work. She had a title at the company Director of Internal Projects, which in practice meant she sat in meetings, nodded at the right times, and approved decisions that had been made before she walked into the room. She was decoration, a last name on an org chart. The road trip from Miami wasn't a vacation, it was an escape. Her father had been negotiating a merger with another development firm. Part of the arrangement included Nora, not on paper, not in a contract, but understood, expected. She would marry the partner's son, consolidating the families. Sealing the deal with his daughter like a handshake made of flesh and blood. I found out at a dinner, she said, her voice flat and steady in the way voices get when the emotion underneath is too heavy to let through. He didn't even tell me himself. The other family's lawyer mentioned it during appetizers. It's casually, like I was a line in the terms sheet.
Nice.
She wiped her eyes once. With the back of her hand, quick, efficient, like clearing a windshield. I got in the car the next morning. Drove north without telling anyone where I was going. Jess followed me, because that's what Jess does. She didn't ask where we were headed. She just got in her car and drove behind me. We kept going until the storm stopped us. She looked at me, and then I knocked on your door. The workshop went quiet. Even the radio seemed to hold its breath. Every wall I'd built over 21 years told me to stay where I was. Keep the distance. Don't offer more than a dry couch and instant cocoa. But every empty room in this house, every silence I'd carried since Della, since Frank, since the morning my mother vanished, told me something different. This shop has an extra workbench, I said, and the house has a spare room that hasn't been used since Della was here. If you need a place to figure out what comes next, the door's open. No conditions. No timeline. Just space. Nora stared at me. She understood what I was offering. Not just a room. Permission to stay somewhere? No one would trade her for anything. But she also knew what it cost me. I'd told her about my mother, about how doors work in my life, about how every person I'd ever cared about had walked through one and not come back. And here I was, opening another one. Are you sure? She asked. I wasn't. Every nerve in my body was screaming that this was how you get hurt again. Yeah, I said. I'm sure. Nora stayed. Jess went back to Miami to finish her semester, but promised to come down on weekends when she could. The house filled up in small, quiet ways. Nora's laptop on the kitchen table each morning, a second coffee mug next to mine by the sink, the same one she'd used the first night. Her jacket draped over the back of the workshop chair like it had always been there. We didn't label what was happening, didn't have a conversation about it. She worked on consulting projects during the day while I restored cars. We'd eat together in the evenings, sit on the porch afterward, and watch the Florida sunsets melt from gold to purple to dark blue. Sometimes she'd come to the workshop just to sit on the bench and read while I worked. She said the sound of tools was the most calming thing she'd heard in years, once. I caught her sketching something on an engineering pad. When I asked what it was, she turned it around. It was a structural redesign of the workshop. New roof trusses, reinforced beams, expanded floor space, a proper drainage system. Just playing around, she said. Your roof leaks on the south side. It's been driving me crazy. I studied the drawing. It was precise, professional, clean lines, proper load calculations, material specs in the margins. The work of someone who knew exactly what she was doing and had been waiting years for someone to notice. You're really good at this, I said. I know, she replied. Nobody's ever let me prove it. That sentence landed in my chest and stayed there. We didn't rush anything. We didn't cross lines. But the distance between us kept getting smaller, and neither of us was stepping back. Her hand brushing mine when we reached for the same wrench. Her shoulder resting against mine on the porch steps. My eyes lingering on her face, a beat too long across the kitchen table when she wasn't looking. Except sometimes she was. Something was building between us. We both felt it. But we also both knew that whatever it was it was fragile, and the thing that could shatter it was already on its way. It arrived on a Thursday morning. 3 weeks and 2 days after the storm, I was in the driveway, rinsing road dust off the Camaro I'd just finished restoring. Nora was inside on a consulting call. The morning was bright and still, aigrettes standing like statues in the drainage ditch across the road. Everything humming with that particular Florida calm that makes you think nothing could possibly go wrong. Then I heard the engine. Low, heavy, expensive. The kind of engine note that doesn't belong on a dead-end street in East Fort Myers, the way a tuxedo doesn't belong at a gas station. A black Cadillac Escalade pulled up to the curb. Tinted windows, polished chrome. The kind of vehicle that cost more than my house and workshop combined. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out, tall, mid-60s, silver hair, linen suit the color of sand, Italian loafers, sunglasses that he removed slowly and folded into his breast pocket with the precision of someone who controls every detail in every room he enters. He looked at the house first, then the workshop, then at me, standing in the driveway in my coveralls, a hose in one hand and a rag in the other, grease under every fingernail. His expression didn't change, but his eyes did. They narrowed the way eyes narrow when someone has already made up their mind about what they're seeing. Behind him, a younger man in a gray suit stayed by the car, holding a phone. An assistant. Because of course there was an assistant. "Where are my daughters?" He said, not a question. A command that had been shaped into one out of courtesy he didn't feel. The front door opened behind me. Nora stepped onto the porch, her face draining of color. A second later, Jess appeared behind her. She'd come down from Miami the evening before Dad. Nora's voice was flat, controlled, the voice of someone who'd been bracing for a collision without knowing when it would come. Douglas Calloway walked up my driveway without waiting for an invitation. His loafers crunching the gravel like it had personally inconvenienced him. He didn't look at the house. He looked through it, like it was a temporary obstruction between him and what he'd come to collect. "The merger closes in 9 days," he said, addressing Nora as if I were a piece of lawn equipment. "Your absence has been noted. It's been explained as a personal sabbatical, but that excuse has a shelf life. Get your things, both of you. We're leaving." "This isn't a sabbatical, Dad," Nora said. "I told you. I'm not part of that arrangement. You're a Calloway. You're part of every arrangement." His eyes shifted to me then. He looked me up and down the coveralls, the grease, the cracked driveway, the sagging porch, the truck with the broken windshield. His gaze was quick and thorough. "The way you appraise something you've already decided has no value. I don't know what you've told my daughters to keep them here," he said, "but I'd suggest you step aside before this becomes more complicated than it needs to be." I set the hose down. Water pooled around my boots. "I didn't tell them anything," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "They knocked on my door during a storm. 14 other houses on this street wouldn't open. And since that night, they're the ones who keep showing up. I've never asked them to stay. I've never asked them for a single thing." I let the words settle. Then I added one more thing. Instead of asking why they're here, you should be asking why they don't want to be there." Douglas went still. Not the stillness of a man thinking about what you said. The stillness of a man who doesn't hear things he hasn't authorized. Nora stepped off the porch. Her voice shook at the edges, but the words themselves were solid. "I'm not a clause in a merger, Dad. I'm not a handshake between you and the Prestons. I'm a civil engineer, a good one, and I'm not going to marry someone I've spoken to twice so you can close a deal." Jess stepped beside her sister. "She's right, and I'm done watching you treat her like an asset on a balance sheet." Douglas looked at his daughters, then at me, then past all of us, toward the workshop behind the house. The open door showed a sliver of the interior, the Camaro's chrome catching the morning sun, tools hanging in neat rows on the pegboard, the framed photo of Frank on the wall above the workbench. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the neighbor's sprinkler, clicking through its cycle in a mockingbird, going through its entire catalog in the oak tree across the road. Then Douglas did something I didn't expect. He walked past all three of us, across the yard and into the workshop. I followed, not sure what he was doing. Nora and Jess stayed on the porch watching. Inside, Douglas moved slowly. His eyes traveled across the space, not dismissively, the way he'd looked at the house, but with something closer to attention. He stopped at the Camaro, ran his hand along the roofline, bent down and studied the chrome trim where the quarter panel met the fender, the seam perfectly flush, the paint a mirror. He examined the wire wheels I'd polished, the leather interior I'd reconditioned stitch by stitch, the dashboard gauges I'd rebuilt with original parts sourced from 3 different states. He straightened up, looked at the tools on the wall, at the workbench, scarred and oiled from 50 years of use, at the shelves of parts, labeled and sorted with a system that had been passed down, not invented. "Who taught you this?" he asked. His voice was different now. The command was gone. Something else had replaced it, something I couldn't quite name yet. "In this shop, With these tools, he spent 40 years restoring cars in this room. Douglas nodded slowly. He pointed at the Camaro. This is exceptional work. I know what this car looked like before restoration. I've seen the model. What you've done here is not mechanical. It's craftsmanship. That's what my grandfather called it. He was right. Douglas turned to face me fully. I collect cars. 12 currently. Kept in a climate-controlled facility in Naples. 3 of them need restoration work that I haven't been able to find anyone qualified to handle. The shop in Cape Coral is competent for maintenance. This, he gestured around the workshop, is something different. He reached into his jacket for a card. But as he did, I shifted my weight, and the old Phillips head screwdriver slipped from my chest pocket. It hit the concrete floor with a sharp, clear sound that echoed off the workshop walls. We both looked down at it. Douglas bent and picked it up before I could. He turned it over in his hand, his fingers finding the carved initials in the wooden grip the way fingers find something familiar. FN. He stared at the letters, then at the handle, worn smooth by decades of use, then at the workbench, then at the framed photograph of Frank on the wall, Frank standing next to a restored 57 Bel Air, grinning, a young version of the same face that had taught me everything, Van Douglas said quietly. Frank Nolan. The air in the workshop changed. You knew my grandfather? I asked. Douglas held the screwdriver carefully, like the weight of it had just doubled. Frank Nolan restored a 1961 Ferrari 250 GT for my father in 1988. I was 23 years old. I came with my father to pick it up from this shop. He looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. I stood right here. Your grandfather walked us through every detail of the restoration. Took 2 hours. My father said it was the finest work he'd ever seen on an automobile. He paused. His thumb traced the initials on the handle. That car is still in my collection. It's one of the 3 that need work. I've been looking for someone who could match the original restoration quality for over a decade. He looked at me. I didn't know Frank Nolan had a grandson. I didn't know this shop was still here. He held the screwdriver out to me. Took it. The handle was warm from his grip. I'm not offering you charity, Douglas said. I'm offering you a contract. 6 vehicles, 12 months. Fair market rate. The work stays here, in this shop. The words hung in the humid air between us. I have one condition, I said. The work goes out under this shop's name. Nolan and Sons, not Calloway, not anyone else. My grandfather's name is on every piece that leaves this building. Douglas studied me for a long moment, and then, for the first time since he'd stepped out of that Escalade, something crossed his face that wasn't authority, or control, or disapproval. It was respect. Your grandfather said something similar to my father in 1988, he said. He said, the name on the work is the name of the man who did it. That's not negotiable. It still isn't, I said. Douglas almost smiled. Fair enough. We shook hands. His grip was firm and held a beat longer than business required. When he let go, he looked at the screwdriver one more time. That tool, he said. Keep it close. The things that start us are the things that keep us honest. He walked out of the workshop and across the yard. Nora was standing on the porch watching. He stopped in front of her. They looked at each other for a long moment, the kind of silence between a father and daughter that holds years of things unsaid. Merger will go forward, he said quietly. Without you attached to it, Nora's eyes filled, but she held steady. And the contract with this shop is real, he added. Based on the work, not on anything else. He looked back at me one more time, standing in the workshop doorway with my grandfather's screwdriver in my pocket and 50 years of honest work on the walls behind me. Then he got in the Escalade. The assistant closed the door. The engine started and the black SUV pulled away down the dead-end street, past the leaning mailboxes and the sandy lawns and the possum that was probably watching from under a hedge somewhere. The street went quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not empty. Settled, Jess went back to Miami the following Sunday. She hugged me at the front door, the kind of hug that practically lifts you off the ground. Don't mess this up, she whispered in my ear. Mess what up? She just grinned and walked to her car. Nora stayed. Not with an announcement, not with a conversation about what we were. She just kept being there. Laptop on the kitchen table in the mornings, her coffee mug next to mine on the shelf, her engineering drawings spreading across the workbench, mixed in with my restoration blueprints. She called her father the following week. A long conversation I didn't listen to. Afterward, she sat on the porch for a while, looking out at the yard without seeing it. I brought her coffee and sat down beside her. You're sending the Ferrari first, she said. The 1961? The one your grandfather restored? Something tightened in my chest. Frank's car. Coming back to Frank's shop, 35 years later, said the roof on the workshop needs replacing before he ships it, she added. I looked at her. He's not wrong about that. I already drew the structural plans, she said. Full redesign. New trusses, better drainage, expanded floor space. I can have permits filed by Friday. I looked at the drawings on her. Lap precise, professional. The work of an engineer who had been waiting her entire life to build something real. You're really going to do this? I said. I'm really going to do this, she replied. And you're going to let me? Because your south wall has been leaning 3 degrees off vertical for at least a year, and it's making me lose sleep. We didn't talk about what we were. We didn't need to. Some things collapse under the weight of being named. They survive better in the space between two people who just keep showing up. She worked on the porch while I worked in the shop. Some evenings, we'd cook together. Nothing complicated. Whatever was in the fridge, plus whatever she'd picked up at the farmer's market on McGregor Boulevard. We'd eat on the porch, the Florida evening settling around us like warm water, frogs singing in the drainage ditch, a neighbor's radio playing something soft through an open window. One night, as the sun dropped behind the palms and turned the entire sky a color that belonged on a postcard nobody would believe was real, she reached over and took my hand. Didn't say anything, just held it, her thumb resting lightly across my knuckles. I didn't pull away. I didn't freeze. For the first time in 21 years, someone reached for me and I let them. That night, after she'd gone to her room, I took our 2 mugs and placed them side by side on the shelf above the sink. Not in the drawer with the rest. On the shelf, where Della used to keep hers and Frank's. Small things. But small things are how you build. A few weeks later, Nora asked what I wanted to do first with the advance from the Calloway contract. I looked across the yard at my '94 Chevy pickup. Cracked windshield, no air conditioning, rust chewing through the wheel wells, the truck that had hauled me through the worst years of my life without ever leaving me stranded. I think I'm going to restore that truck, I said. It's earned it. She looked at the pickup, then back at me, and smiled. About time. The evening hummed around us, cicadas in the palms, the workshop lights still on, casting a warm glow across the yard. The smell of cut grass and salt air drifting in from the Gulf. I reached into my chest pocket and felt the screwdriver handle, the worn wood, the carved initials, the weight of everything my grandfather started in this shop 50 years ago. Della used to say, you build what you keep. You keep what you care for. I spent most of my life thinking that meant holding on to things because people always leave. But sitting on that porch, with Nora beside me, and the workshop glowing behind us, and the tools in their places, and a 1961 Ferrari on its way home to the shop where it was born, I finally understood what Della really meant. You don't build walls to keep people out. You build doors. And the ones that matter, the ones worth everything, are the ones you choose to keep open.